Hey guys, how's it going? Hope you're doing well. My name is Crown, and today I'm going to read you some very interesting stories that I hope that you're gonna love. And now, without further ado, let's go!
I work in information technology support for TechFlow Solutions. It's a mid-sized company with around 200 employees across different departments. My job involves keeping all the computer systems running smoothly, fixing network issues, and making sure everyone can do their work without technical problems getting in the way. The company has always been relaxed about personal phones. We could keep them at our desks as long as we weren't spending all day scrolling through social media or watching videos. Management understood that sometimes your kid's school calls, or you're waiting for test results from the doctor, or your elderly parent needs to reach you. It was never really a problem because we're all adults who know how to balance work and personal life. Our previous manager was really understanding about this stuff. He knew that emergencies happen and that completely cutting people off from their families during work hours wasn't realistic or fair. The whole team respected him for treating us like responsible adults. Then last month, everything changed. We got a new manager who worked his way up through some corporate ladder at a much stricter company. This guy had zero tolerance for anything that wasn't directly work-related. He walked around the office like he was inspecting troops, looking for any reason to assert his authority. One afternoon, he caught one of my co-workers quickly checking a text message. It wasn't even during a busy period. We were in between tickets and things were pretty calm. But this new manager lost his mind. He started yelling about professionalism and focus. The poor guy who got caught just stood there, looking embarrassed while half the office stared. That same day, we all got this email that made my blood boil. The subject line read "New policy, no personal phones," and the message was short and harsh. He announced that, effective immediately, no personal phones would be allowed during work hours. He demanded that all phones must be left in cars or lockers from 9 a.m. to 5 p.m. with no exceptions. He threatened that anyone caught with a phone would be written up immediately. He ended the email by reminding us that we were there to work, not socialize or handle personal matters, and that this policy would be strictly enforced. I read that email 3 times, getting angrier each time. No exceptions, really? I thought about my diabetic coworker who needs to monitor her blood sugar app. I thought about the single mom on our team whose daycare might need to reach her. But the email was crystal clear. No exceptions meant no exceptions. Here's the thing that made this whole situation even more ridiculous. Our manager works from home 3 days a week. Monday, Wednesday, and Friday, he's sitting in his home office in his pajamas while we're stuck following his strict rules. When technical emergencies happen after hours or on weekends, how does he contact us? Through our personal phones, of course. The company is too cheap to give us work phones. So I followed his policy exactly. Every morning I walked to my car and locked my phone in the glove compartment. It felt weird being completely disconnected from the outside world. But I wasn't about to give this guy the satisfaction of writing me up. Friday afternoon rolled around and I was wrapping up my work for the week. At 4:45 p.m., I noticed some warning alerts popping up on my computer screen. One of our main servers was starting to have issues. The error messages were clear. It was a problem I'd seen before and could fix in about 10 minutes. But here's where things got interesting. I looked toward the parking lot where my phone was sitting in my car, then looked back at my computer screen showing the server problems getting worse. I could either break the no phone policy to call my manager, or I could follow his rules to the letter. I chose to follow the rules. I finished documenting the server issues, sent a detailed email to my manager's work account about what I was seeing, and shut down my computer at exactly 5 o'clock p.m. I walked out of the building at my normal time just like any other Friday. When I got to my car at 5:15 p.m. and finally checked my phone, I saw what was waiting for me. 17 missed calls. 17. Plus a string of text messages that went from professional to panicked to furious. The first few texts were pretty standard. He asked me to fix the server and mentioned that multiple departments were affected. But then they got more desperate. He demanded to know where I was and called it an emergency. He told me the entire accounting department couldn't access their files. His messages became increasingly angry, with him calling my lack of response unacceptable and demanding that I call him immediately. I sat in my car reading through all these messages, and I'll admit I was enjoying myself a little bit. The server had been down for over 30 minutes by this point. In our business, that's a lifetime. People couldn't access important files, projects were on hold, and I'm sure some clients were getting frustrated. I took my time calling him back. When he answered, he was practically screaming. He demanded to know where I had been and why I hadn't answered my phone for half an hour. He yelled that the server was down and that this was completely unacceptable. I explained that I had just gotten to my car and seen his calls, then asked what was going on. When he repeated that the server was down and demanded to know why I didn't answer, I reminded him that my phone was in my car, just like his policy required. He insisted that this was an emergency and completely different from normal circumstances. I pointed out that his email had been clear about no phones during work hours with no exceptions, and that I was just following company policy to avoid getting written up. He argued that this was a critical system failure, but I reminded him again that he had said no exceptions. I mentioned that I had sent him an email about the server issues before I left, though he probably didn't see it since he was working from home. The silence on the other end of the phone was beautiful. He eventually just told me to fix the problem immediately. I agreed to log in remotely and take care of it. I fixed the server problem in about 15 minutes, just like I knew I could have done at 4:45 p.m. Monday morning came and guess what was waiting in my inbox? Another email from our beloved manager. The subject line read, "Updated policy, personal phone use," and the tone was much more reasonable this time. He explained that after reviewing communication needs, personal phones were now permitted at desks for emergency purposes. He asked that we continue to use good judgment regarding personal phone use during work hours. I showed the email to my co-workers and we all had a good laugh. The single mom could keep her phone for daycare calls again. My diabetic co-worker could monitor her health app. The manager never mentioned the server incident directly, but I noticed he started being a lot less aggressive about micromanaging our daily activities. I'm 16 and still living at home with my mom. I work part-time at a local cafe after school and weekends to save up for college and to buy things for my room. My room is basically my sanctuary. It's the one place in the house that's completely mine, and I've spent the last 3 years turning it into exactly what I want it to be. I'm really into Japanese animation, indie music, and basically anything artistic that speaks to me. Every penny I've earned has gone toward decorating my space. The walls are completely covered in posters, banners, and postcards. There's literally no empty wall space left. I have this incredible collection of 2,000 Studio Ghibli postcards that I've arranged on one entire wall like a massive collage. Then there are 7 full-size movie posters, 5 smaller ones, and 40 pictures of my favorite musician Hosier arranged in a grid pattern, plus tons of other memorabilia from bands and shows I love. The ceiling wasn't left out either. I spent an entire weekend balancing on a pile of cushions, stapling 3 posters up there. One of them is this character called Ryuk from an anime called Death Note. He's supposed to be a death god, so yeah, he looks pretty scary with his black wings and creepy grin. But I think he's cool, and it took me forever to get that poster positioned perfectly. My older brother moved out years ago when he got married. He's 29 now and has a 6-year-old son. They live about 2 hours away, so we don't see them very often. Honestly, I prefer it that way because my brother and I have never really gotten along. He's always been the type to boss me around and act like he knows better about everything. Yesterday, my mom dropped bombshell on me. She told me that my brother was coming to visit the next night with my nephew and they would be staying in my room. When I asked why they couldn't stay in the guest room, she explained that the guest room didn't have bunk beds, and my nephew would be more comfortable in my room with the single bed and pull-out. I asked where I was supposed to sleep and she said on the couch like it was obvious. She said it was just one night and that it was the polite thing to do for guests. I was already furious. My mom is from an older generation where you're expected to give up everything for guests, even when those guests are your own family who could easily afford a hotel room. But I knew arguing with her wouldn't get me anywhere. This morning, my brother called to discuss the arrangements. He said he heard they were staying in my room and wanted to make sure it was appropriate for a 6-year-old. When I asked what he meant by appropriate, he said he remembered my room being pretty weird with lots of dark stuff. I told him it was just posters and pictures of things I liked and nothing inappropriate. Then he brought up the poster on my ceiling. He called Ryuk a creepy demon thing that needed to come down because it would terrify his son. I explained that it was just a character from an anime and that I wasn't taking it down because it was stapled to the ceiling and I didn't want to damage it. He got angry and said I was being completely unreasonable. He claimed I would have been scared of something like that when I was my nephew's age too. I told him that wasn't my problem. I had spent my own money on this stuff and I wasn't going to rip it down for one night. Then he demanded I take down all the hosier pictures too. He said they looked like some kind of shrine that was cult-like and weird. At this point, I was done listening to him. The hosier pictures are arranged in a neat grid pattern. It's not a shrine, it's just how I chose to display them because I'm a fan of his music. I told him I wasn't taking anything down and if he didn't like my room, he could stay somewhere else. He called me a selfish brat and said Mom had told him I would cooperate. I said Mom could say whatever she wanted, but it was still my room and my stuff. He hung up on me. Then my mom got involved. She said my brother had called her very upset and that he said I was being unreasonable about the decorations. I told her I wasn't changing my entire room for one night because I had worked hard to afford all this stuff. She said they were just posters and I could put them back up tomorrow. I pointed out that they were stapled to the ceiling and asked why I should have to. She reminded me that I was living under her roof and sometimes we make sacrifices for family. It wasn't about the posters really, it was about the principle. My brother was coming into my personal space and demanding I change everything to suit him, and my mom was supporting him instead of me. Later that afternoon they arrived. My nephew seemed excited to be visiting and I have to admit, he's actually a pretty cool kid when his dad isn't being controlling. We went to pick them up from the train station, and on the drive back my brother asked if I had taken care of those decorations like we had discussed. I told him nope. He asked if I was seriously going to traumatize a 6-year-old because I was being stubborn. I said if his son got traumatized by pictures on a wall, that was a parenting problem, not a poster problem. My mom shot me a warning look in the rearview mirror, but I was past caring. When we got home, my mom gave me babysitting duty while she and my brother caught up. We played in the yard for a while, then some video games, but eventually my nephew got bored. He asked if we could watch YouTube in my room because he was tired of playing downstairs. Before I could answer, my brother jumped in and said no way. He told his son there were scary pictures up there that he wouldn't like, but this just made my nephew more curious. Kids are like that. Tell them they can't see something and suddenly it's the only thing they want to see. My nephew asked what kind of scary pictures and if he could see them. I said sure and told him to come on up. My brother said he really didn't think this was a good idea, but I ignored him and led my nephew upstairs. The moment we walked into my room, his eyes went straight to the ceiling where Ryuk was staring down with his creepy grin. My nephew said, "Wow, that was so cool," and asked if Ryuk was from an anime. I told him, yeah, from Death Note, and that he was supposed to be scary. My nephew said Ryuk looked awesome and that he played Call of Duty Zombies all the time, so this guy wasn't even that scary compared to those. Then he noticed the hosier pictures. He asked who the guy was and why I had so many pictures of him. I explained that he was a musician I really liked and that his music was amazing. My nephew thought that was cool and asked if I could play some of his songs. We spent the next hour listening to music while he asked questions about all my posters. He thought the Studio Ghibli wall was epic and wanted to know about every single movie. He wasn't scared or disturbed by anything. He was genuinely interested and thought it was all pretty cool. Meanwhile, my brother kept hovering in the doorway, clearly annoyed that his son was enjoying my room instead of being traumatized by it. Eventually, he said that was enough and it was time to come downstairs. My nephew protested that he wanted to hear more music and learn about more movie posters, but his dad insisted they come down. His responses were pretty short and irritated. I heard my nephew talking excitedly to his dad about how cool my room was and asking if he could decorate his room like that. My brother's responses were pretty short and irritated. That evening during dinner, the truth finally came out. My mom asked how the room tour went and if there were any problems with the decorations. My nephew said it was awesome and that he loved the scary demon guy and all the movie posters. He asked if he could sleep on the top bunk so he could see the ceiling better. My brother asked his son if he wasn't scared of any of it. My nephew asked why he would be scared since they were just pictures. He said he saw way scarier stuff in his zombie games. I asked my brother how he could let his kid play zombie games but worry about a poster. He said that was different. I asked how it was different since those games were way more intense than anything on my walls. My mom asked what zombie games my nephew was talking about. He excitedly listed Call of Duty, Dead Rising, and some other game with really gross monsters. Now my mom was giving my brother a look. She asked how he could let a 6-year-old play violent video games but worry about anime posters. My brother said those games weren't that bad, and that wasn't the point anyway. But it totally was the point. My brother had made this huge fuss about my room being inappropriate when he lets his kid play games that are rated for mature audiences. The whole thing was just him trying to control me and make me feel bad about my interests. The next morning, they were getting ready to leave. My nephew gave me a hug and thanked me for showing him my cool room. He said when he was older, he wanted to have posters like that too. My brother said they would see about that. My nephew asked his dad why he had been worried about the pictures since they weren't scary at all. My brother said he just thought his son might not like them. My nephew pointed out that his dad hadn't even asked him and had just assumed he would be scared. Even a 6-year-old could see that my brother had been making assumptions and trying to control a situation that didn't need controlling. After they left, my mom and I cleaned up, and I got to keep my room exactly the way I like it. Demon posters and all. I work as a news helicopter pilot for Channel 7 for about 8 years now. My cameraman and I have covered everything from traffic accidents to wildfires, but nothing prepared me for what happened last Tuesday in the quiet suburb of Maplewood Heights. I got into helicopter piloting after my military service ended. The transition from Army aviation to civilian news work felt natural, and I loved the idea of keeping people told about what was happening in their city. The pay was decent, the hours were flexible, and most days were pretty routine. Traffic reports, weather updates, the occasional house fire, simple stuff. That morning started like any other. My cameraman and I were doing our regular traffic surveillance when dispatch crackled over the radio about a high-speed chase heading toward the residential area. A stolen vehicle had crashed into a fence, and the suspect had fled on foot into the neighborhood. Police units were setting up a perimeter, and we were asked to provide aerial support to help track the guy. We arrived at the scene within minutes. The crashed car was still smoking at the end of Elm Street, and I could see police officers spreading out between the houses. The suspect had apparently jumped several backyard fences and was hiding somewhere in the maze of homes below us. My cameraman was getting good footage of the search operation when we spotted movement behind a blue house with a large oak tree in the backyard. The suspect was crouched behind a garden shed, clearly trying to stay out of sight. I radioed the information to the ground units and positioned our helicopter to keep visual contact. That's when she came out. This middle-aged woman stormed out of the house next door, walking across her perfectly manicured lawn with something in her hands. At first, I thought she was just another curious neighbor coming out to see what all the commotion was about. We get that a lot during these situations. But then I saw the rifle. She started shouting up at us, waving the weapon around and screaming about government spies. She claimed we weren't really a news helicopter, but some kind of surveillance operation hovering over her property. My cameraman and I exchanged worried looks when her ranting got louder and more aggressive. I immediately radioed dispatch to report that we had a civilian with a firearm on Elm Street who was threatening our aircraft. The dispatcher acknowledged and said ground units were heading to our location. The woman kept yelling about how she knew who we really were and that we weren't fooling anyone with our fake news helicopter cover story. She raised the rifle and pointed it directly at us. I immediately started evasive maneuvers, pulling the helicopter higher and to the left. I radioed that she was aiming at us and that I was taking evasive action. That's when she started shooting. The first shot cracked past our tail rotor. The sound was unmistakable, that sharp pop followed by the whistle of a bullet cutting through air. My military training kicked in instantly, and I threw the helicopter into a tight spiral to make us a harder target. My cameraman asked if she was actually shooting at us. I told him to keep filming and hold on tight. 3 more shots rang out from below. I could see muzzle flashes from her front yard when she tracked our movement with the rifle. One bullet struck our landing skid with a metallic ping that made my heart jump into my throat. She screamed up at us that we couldn't silence her because she had evidence that would bring down our whole operation. Police cars were screaming into the neighborhood from multiple directions now. The original suspect they were chasing seemed forgotten when officers rushed to deal with the woman firing at a news helicopter in broad daylight. The officers ordered her to drop the weapon immediately and put it down. She responded by claiming they weren't real police but government agents trying to cover up the truth. I managed to get us to a safe distance while keeping the camera rolling. Below, at least 6 police officers had surrounded the woman, all with their weapons drawn. She was still holding the rifle but had stopped shooting at us. She yelled that she'd been watching us for months, claiming we'd been flying over her house, taking pictures, and gathering intelligence. She insisted she knew what we were really after. The officer gave her a final warning to drop the weapon or they would use force. She responded by ranting about having documents that proved everything. She mentioned mind control experiments, surveillance networks, and fake elections. She finally lowered the rifle, but she kept ranting even when the officers moved in to arrest her. She claimed that arresting her wouldn't stop the truth from coming out because she had already uploaded everything to 17 different websites. She said the people would know what we had done. The officer arrested her for discharging a firearm in city limits, reckless endangerment, and assault with a deadly weapon. She protested that this was illegal detention and demanded to speak to a real FBI agent instead of what she called imposters. When they handcuffed her and led her toward the patrol car, she kept screaming about government conspiracies and cover-ups. She insisted that our helicopter was actually a black ops surveillance drone and that the news story was just a cover for a targeted assassination attempt on her life. My cameraman was getting it all on film. This was definitely going to be the lead story tonight. I radioed dispatch that the suspect was in custody and that our aircraft was damaged but still flyable. We were heading back to base. The dispatcher congratulated us on our good work. The really satisfying part came later when we found out more about her background. Turns out this wasn't Karen's first run-in with the law. She'd been arrested twice before for harassing mail carriers, claiming they were government spies reading her mail. She'd also called the police dozens of times to report suspicious aircraft that turned out to be regular commercial flights following normal flight paths over the city. She got evicted within 2 weeks. I've been watching the clouds from my apartment window, waiting for a break in the weather so I could finally get some pool time. When I saw the sun peek through the clouds and the rain stop, I knew this was my chance. I quickly grabbed my lunchbox and packed it with a few cold beers from the fridge. The pool rules technically say no glass containers, but beer cans are fine and I always clean up after myself. I also grabbed my girlfriend's pink donut float and my apartment keys before heading down to my car. The pool area is just a short drive from my building, which is convenient since I don't like carrying wet stuff back upstairs. When I was unloading my car in the parking lot next to the pool, I noticed a woman inside the fenced area staring at me. She had her arms crossed and was just watching me gather my stuff. It seemed a bit odd, but I figured maybe she was just bored or waiting for someone. I collected my things and walked over to the gate entrance where residents scan their key fobs to get in. The pool has this security system to keep non-residents out, which I appreciate since it keeps the area from getting too crowded. When I approached the scanner, the same woman who had been staring at me suddenly stepped directly in front of me. blocking my path. She demanded that I give her my float. I actually laughed out loud because I thought she was joking. Who just walks up to a stranger and demands their stuff? I told her no, but she didn't move aside. She just stood there in the narrow entryway, completely blocking my access to the pool area. She repeated her demand for the float, explaining that her son had said he wanted it. She then told me to give it to her and suggested that I should just go back to my apartment instead. Now I was getting annoyed. This woman was literally trying to steal my girlfriend's float and kick me out of my own apartment complex pool. The entitlement was unbelievable. I told her there was no chance I would give it to her and that my answer was final. I suggested that if she wanted one, she could go buy one from the store since they were very cheap. I wasn't lying about the price either. These inflatable donuts cost maybe $15 at most stores. It's not like I was holding some expensive luxury item. She scoffed at me and finally moved out of the way, but I could feel her glaring at me when I scanned my key fob and walked through the gate. The pool area wasn't very crowded, maybe 6 or 7 people total, so I headed to the far side where nobody else was sitting. I wanted to avoid any more confrontation with this woman. I cracked open one of my beers and carefully got into the donut float. The water felt perfect, and I was finally starting to relax after dealing with that weird encounter. For about 10 minutes, I just floated around peacefully, enjoying the brief sunshine and the cold beer. Then I felt someone grab the side of my float and try to flip me over. I looked up and saw a kid, probably around 12 or 13 years old, trying his best to dump me into the water. Since I'm a pretty big guy, he wasn't having much success, but he kept trying. The kid demanded that I get off the float because he wanted it. I told him to stop and reminded him that the float wasn't his. The kid got frustrated when he couldn't flip me and swam back across the pool to where his mother was sitting. I watched them have what looked like an intense conversation, with her gesturing angrily in my direction. After a few minutes, she stood up and started gathering their things. She pulled her son out of the pool and began packing up their stuff, but she made sure to do it loudly and dramatically. Everyone else at the pool was starting to look over at the commotion. She yelled loud enough for everyone in the entire pool area to hear, thanking me sarcastically for ruining their pool day and saying she hoped I was happy. I could see the other residents looking back and forth between us, trying to figure out what was happening. I yelled back that she was welcome and suggested that maybe next time she shouldn't be so rude. I told her that if she had asked nicely, I would have let her use my things. And that was the truth. If she had just approached me politely and explained that her son wanted to use a float, I probably would have shared it with them for a while. I'm not unreasonable, and I know how to be neighborly. But demanding that I give her my property and then trying to have her kids steal it from me crossed every line. After my response, she grabbed her son's hand and walked out of the pool area. The other residents went back to their own business, though a couple of them gave me understanding nods. I stayed at the pool for another hour or so, finishing my beer and enjoying the peaceful atmosphere now that the drama had passed. I moved in with this guy about 6 months ago when I was looking for somewhere affordable near campus. We both enjoyed smoking MJ, which I figured would make us compatible roommates since we had that common interest. I'm pretty generous by nature. My parents taught me that sharing is caring, and I carried that philosophy into my adult life. When my roommate and I would hang out and smoke together, I never minded covering the cost most of the time. I had a decent part-time job at a local coffee shop, and MJ wasn't breaking my budget. I made it clear from day one that I was totally cool with him using my stash when I wasn't around. All I asked was that he shoot me a text first, just so I'd know and could plan accordingly. It seemed like a reasonable request, just basic roommate courtesy. But here's the thing. He never asked. Not once. At first, I didn't really notice much. Maybe a joint's worth would be missing here and there, which honestly wasn't a big deal. I probably wouldn't have even cared if he had just asked like I requested. But when weeks went by, I started paying closer attention. It was always small amounts, nothing too obvious, but then it was definitely happening regularly. The pattern was pretty predictable. I'd leave for work or class, and when I'd come back, my stash would be slightly lighter. Sometimes the grinder would be in a different position, or there'd be ash in my favorite bowl that I knew I hadn't used. Little signs that someone had been into my stuff without permission. I brought it up casually a few times, reminding him that he just needed to ask first. He'd always brush it off or change the subject. It was becoming clear that he was just going to keep doing whatever he wanted, regardless of what we'd agreed on. That's when I started thinking about how to handle this situation. I'm not really a confrontational person, and kicking up a huge fight over MJ seemed pretty stupid. But I also wasn't going to just let someone walk all over me indefinitely. I needed to find a way to make my point without turning our living situation into a war zone. The perfect opportunity came up when my family planned a month-long vacation to visit relatives overseas. My parents had surprised me with a trip and an early graduation gift, and I was excited to get away from school stress for a while. But it also meant leaving my two cats behind with my roommate, who'd agreed to feed them and clean their litter box. That's when the idea hit me. A few days before leaving, I went to the pet store and bought a fresh bag of premium catnip for my cats. The stuff smelled pretty strong and had that same green, leafy appearance that might fool someone who wasn't paying close attention. I also grabbed an old bowl I never used anymore from my closet, one that had some resin buildup but nothing recent. The night before my flight, I set up my little trap. I placed a bag of catnip right on my desk next to my bong, positioned exactly where I usually kept my MJ. I even lifted my rolling tray out with some papers scattered around, making it look like I'd just finished a session before packing for my trip. My roommate helped me carry my luggage to my ride to the airport the next morning, and I made sure to mention how much I'd miss smoking my good stuff while I was gone. I could practically see the wheels turning in his head. The vacation was amazing. I spent 4 weeks eating incredible food, catching up with family members I hadn't seen in years, and completely forgetting about roommate drama. My cats were apparently doing fine based on the occasional photos my roommate would send. When I finally got back home, jet-lagged and exhausted, the first thing I noticed was that the catnip bag was significantly lighter. I had to bite back a grin when I unpacked my suitcase. The trap had worked perfectly. I didn't say anything that first day back. I just acted normal, asked about my cats, and thanked him for taking care of them. But I could tell something was off. He seemed a little sheepish, avoiding eye contact more than usual. The next evening, he knocked on my door and came into my room. He welcomed me back and asked about my trip in this overly casual way that made it obvious he was nervous about something. I told him the vacation was great and thanked him again for watching my cats. He said they were easy to take care of, but his voice sounded weird. That's when I picked up the nearly empty catnip bag from my desk and held it up. I asked him directly if he had smoked any of it while I was gone. His face went completely red. He stood there for a few seconds, clearly trying to figure out how to respond. Finally, he admitted that maybe he had smoked just a little bit and hoped it was okay. I told him straight up that he had smoked catnip. He looked confused and asked what I meant, insisting it was my regular stash. I explained that it was catnip for my cats and told him to smell it if he didn't believe me. I opened the bag and held it toward him. He took a tentative sniff, then his eyes went wide with shock and embarrassment. He said he couldn't believe he hadn't been able to tell the difference and asked if I was being serious. I confirmed I was completely serious and that he'd been smoking catnip for the past month. He started laughing, probably from a combination of embarrassment and disbelief. He said he couldn't believe he couldn't tell the difference and asked how I knew he would smoke it. I explained that it was because he always smoked my stuff without asking first, just like I had told him not to do months ago. The laughter slowly died down when the full picture became clear to him. He realized I had left the catnip there on purpose and accused me of setting him up. I confirmed that I had definitely set him up and pointed out that if he had just asked me before taking it, like we had agreed on months ago, I would have told him it was catnip. He tried to argue that setting him up like that was messed up. I shot back that what was really messed up was continuing to take my stuff without permission, after I had specifically asked him to just send me a text first. I reminded him that asking permission was literally all he had to do. He stood there for a minute, probably realizing he didn't have much of a leg to stand on in this argument. Eventually, he admitted I was right and apologized for not asking first like he should have been doing. I told him I appreciated the apology and joked that at least now he knew catnip wouldn't get him high. We both started laughing and all the tension in the room completely disappeared. And now we have reached the end of today's stories. Thank you for watching and see you next time.